We are doing chapter 16, titled Through the Trapdoor. And if you all remember, when they got back to their rooms after that weird detention scenario that they went through in the woods, Harry's invisibility cloak was underneath his blanket, and it said, just in case.
Mm-hmm.
So, here we are now, chapter 16. So, they go into exams, and, you know, they're just doing their things. It's getting hot. It's getting toward the end of the year. They're doing, huh? Oh, you're right. Okay, you're right. My bad. I knew I skipped over something. All right. 2 new characters. I know, huh? 2 new characters this chapter. We finally see, I think we've heard of it before, but we finally see the giant squid.
Yeah.
And then the second new character, and we don't meet them, we're just told about them, the stranger in the pub. And okay, that sounds super generic, but I promise it's a pretty significant character once we get into the summary. Yeah. So now they're going through their exams. Summer's coming. It's getting hot. They are. They have both written exams and practical exams. So they're going through their exams, and then the last exam is History of Magic, and they're all finished, and then everybody's all relieved. And so they all head outside, and they're sitting under a tree, and they're chit-chatting, and they're like, oh, yay, we don't have to study anymore, and this, that, and the other. And Harry mentions that his scar keeps hurting all the time, and he's like, you know, it's happened before, but not like this. And Hermione's immediately like, well, go to Madame Pomfrey. And he's like, yeah, I don't know. You know, I don't know. What am I going to tell her? Like,
he's obviously very doubtful that Madame Pomfrey knows or can do anything about this very unique scar.
Right. And he's like, I don't know what it is, but I think it's a warning. I think it means danger's coming. And one of my favorite lines from this chapter is when right after that it says, Ron couldn't get worked up. It was too hot. So then Ron's like, dude.
Because this is one of the chapters that makes me, or one of the whole chapters that makes me love Ron so much, because he has so many zingers in this chapter.
This is a great Ron chapter. It really is. Yeah. It's a really great Ron chapter, because I know of another one that's coming up that I know I highlighted to talk about too. But yeah, he's like, you know, Harry, just relax. We're done with exams. The stone's safe as long as Dumbledore's here. Nobody knows how to get past Fluffy. Snape already tried. Fluffy almost ripped his leg off. I think we're good. Like,
I love it. He goes, he nearly had his leg ripped off once. He's not going to try it again in a hurry. And now we'll play Quidditch for England before Hagrid lets Dumbledore down.
And then Harry's nodding and he's like, yeah, okay, but he's still feeling like there's something that he can't quite get his mind around. And Hermione's like, oh yeah, sure, it's because of the exams. She's like, I woke up last night and was halfway through my transfiguration notes before I realized we already took that test. And Harry was like, yeah, no, I don't think that's it. He didn't think it had anything to do with his work, really.
Yeah.
And so then he sees an owl flying over with a letter, and in his mind, he's like, wow, Hagrid's the only one who sends me letters. And then all of a sudden, he's like, wait a minute. Light bulb. And he stands up and starts to run, and Ron's like, where are you going? And he's like, I just thought of something. We got to get to Hagrid's right now. And Hermione's running along beside him. She's like, why? Why do we got to get to Hagrid's? I love that about them. They're like, oh, we got to go now? Okay. Why, though?
Yeah. they're still going. They're still going.
Yeah, because it says, why, Hermione panted, keep hurrying to keep up. So then Harry says, don't you think it's a bit odd that what Hagrid wants more than anything else is a dragon, and a stranger turns up who just happens to have an egg in his pocket? How many people wander around with dragon eggs if it's against the wizard law? Lucky they found Hagrid, don't you think? Why didn't I see it before? And Ron's like, what? But Harry's still running, and so they're still trying to keep up. So they get to Hagrid's, and he's sitting outside, and he's like, hey, you guys finished your exams, huh? You want to have a drink? And Ron's like, yes, please. And Harry's like, no, we're in a hurry. Hagrid, I got to ask you something. You know that night you won Norbert? What did the stranger you were playing cards with look like? Dunno, said Hagrid casually. He wouldn't take his cloak off. He saw the three of them look stunned and raised his eyebrows. It's not that unusual. You get a lot of funny folk in the Hog's Head. That's one of the pubs down in the village. Might have been a dragon dealer, mightn't he? I never saw his face. He kept his hood up. So now they're worried, and Harry's like, but what did you guys talk about, Hagrid? Did you mention Hogwarts at all? Long and the short of it, Hagrid's like, yeah, mighta. He asked me what I did. I told him I'm the gamekeeper. He asked me if I had any interest in creatures. I told him about Fluffy. They're like, did he seem interested in Fluffy? And Hagrid's like, of course he seemed interested in Fluffy. Who wouldn't be interested in Fluffy? How many three-headed dogs do you see? And so then Harry's like, well, he says, well, yeah, how many three-headed dogs do you meet, even around Hogwarts? So I told him, Fluffy's a piece of cake if you know how to calm him down. Just play him a bit of music and he'll go straight off to sleep. And then Hagrid suddenly stopped horrified. And of course, the favorite Hagrid line, shouldn't have told you that. Should not have said that. Forget I said that. Hey, where are you going? So they immediately take off and go to the entrance hall. And when they get there, Harry's like, we got to go to Dumbledore. And they're like, yeah, because, you know. And then they're like, well, where's Dumbledore's office? And nobody knows where Dumbledore's office is. And so they run into Professor McGonagall, and she's carrying a big old stack of books. And Hermione says, or she asks them what they're doing inside, and Hermione says that they're looking for Dumbledore. And Professor McGonagall's like, what do you need to see Dumbledore for? And Harry swallowed. He's like, now what? And he tells her, it's sort of a secret. Which made Professor McGonagall's nostrils flare, which is never a good sign. And so she tells them that he left like 10 minutes ago. He went to the Ministry of Magic, and he'll be back in the morning. And Harry's like, what? He's gone? Now? And McGonagall, of course, not knowing what they're going on about, is like, you know, Dumbledore's a great wizard. He doesn't just sit around. You know, do you think that whatever you need to tell him is so important that it's more important than the Ministry of Magic?
And at that point in time, Harry's like, yes, it is. Caution to the wind. It's about the Sorcerer's Stone.
At which point, Professor McGonagall drops her huge pile of books. And she's like, how do you know about that? What is it? And then Harry's like, Professor, I know that someone's going to steal the stone, to try to steal the stone, and I've got to talk to Professor Dumbledore. And as she's eyeing him with a mixture of shock and amazement, suspicion, it's a shock and suspicion, she tells them he's going to be gone until tomorrow, but they have the stone all protected, and that there is probably that... What did she say? She said, she says, I don't know how you found out about the stone, but rest assured, no one can possibly steal it. It's too well protected. And she sends them back outside and tells them to go out and enjoy the sunshine and the no more exams.
Right.
And so they go, they're talking about it, and they're like, all right, well, tonight we go down because Snape's going to go get the stone. It's going to be tonight. And then Snape walks by, and he's like, what are you guys doing here? And they're like, and he's like, people are going to think you're up to something.
Right.
And so and then he says, you don't want me to take more points from Gryffindor, do you? And Harry flashes or whatever. And so they go outside, and then Snape called them back. Huh?
He warns them too. He warns them. He's like, any more nighttime strolls.
Yeah, I was just going to say. So it says they went back outside, but then Snape called them back. And he said, be warned, Potter, any more nighttime wanderings, and I will personally make sure you are expelled. Good day to you. And so they go back outside, and this is where they see the... oh, no, it was earlier when they were outside when they saw the squid, because...
That was after exam.
When they were outside earlier, they saw Fred and George playing with the giant squid when they went outside, when they were like, oh, they saw people all hanging out outside. Anyway, so they make a plan right then and there. And Ron and Harry are like, Hermione, you got to hang out outside of the teacher's, they call it the staff room. I was going to say the teacher's lounge, but they call it the staff room. Because if anybody sees you there, you could just pretend you're waiting for Professor Flitwick and tell him you want to talk about answer 14B or whatever. Hermione's like, oh, shut up. But then she agreed to go. So she's going to watch Snape. And then Harry and Ron decide they're going to go wait by the third floor corridor to make sure nobody goes there. So they go. But when they get there, they're outside of the door. And Professor McGonagall comes, and she's like, I suppose you think you're harder to get past than a pack of enchantments. This is enough nonsense. She's like, if I hear you're over here again, I'll take 50 points from each of you. Yes, Weasley, from my own house. So Harry and Ron went back to the common room. And then Harry was like, well, at least Hermione's still waiting outside the staff room, which cues the opening of the common room door, where Hermione comes in, and they're like, what the heck? And she's like, I'm sorry, Harry. Snape came out and asked me what I was doing. So I said I was waiting for Flitwick, and Snape went and got him for me. And I've just gotten away from talking to Flitwick, and I don't know where Snape went. And Harry's like, okay, well then I guess that's it then, huh? And the other two stared at him, and they were pale. And he says, hey, I'm going to have to get out there tonight and try to get to the stone first. And Ron says, you're mad. And Hermione says, you can't. After what McGonagall and Snape said, you'll be expelled. And so Harry's like, yeah, so don't you understand? I got to go get the stone before Snape gets the stone, and Voldemort's waiting, and maybe Voldemort's going to try to get the stone too, and who knows, and all this stuff. And so he goes on and on and on. And Voldemort killed my parents, remember?
And then I really like this part, like the perspective of who cares about house points, who cares about this and that and whatever. It's the reality of it that if Voldemort gets the stone,
and he's like, and even if I die trying to do it, at least I tried to stop it. Don't you understand? Like, and then Hermione's like, well, you're right. And Harry's like, I'll use the invisibility cloak, and it's just lucky I got it back. And then Ron says, will it cover all three of us? And Harry's like, all three of us? And he's like, oh, come off it. Do you think we're going to let you go alone? Of course not, said Hermione briskly. How do you think you'd get to the stone without us? I'd better go and look through my books. There might be something useful. But if we get caught, you two will get expelled too. Not if I can help it, said Hermione grimly. Flitwick told me in secret that I got 112% on his exam. They're not throwing me out after that. I love Hermione. So they go on about the rest of their afternoon, knowing that once everybody goes to bed, they're going to sneak out. So they're doing their thing, and they're hanging out in the common room, trying to act all nonchalant until everybody goes to bed. And once everybody kind of starts slowly drifting off to bed, Ron says, hey, you should probably go get the cloak. And so Harry runs upstairs, and he gets the cloak. And he sees the flute that Hagrid gave him for Christmas. And so he grabs it and puts it in his pocket, thinking, oh, we might be able to use this. And so he runs back down to the common room, and he's like, we better put it on here on all three of us before we go out and make sure that it covers us all, because if Filch sees one of our feet, we're going to really be in trouble. And then all of a sudden they hear a voice from the corner. What are you guys doing? And Neville pops up from behind an armchair holding his toad. And they're like, nothing, Neville, nothing. And they hide the cloak behind their back. And Neville's like staring at them. And he's like, you're going out again. And Hermione's like, no, we're not. Why don't you go to bed, Neville? And he's like, you cannot go out. You'll get caught again. Gryffindor will be in even more trouble. And Harry's like, look, you don't understand. This is really important. And Neville's like, not really trying to hear it. He's kind of looking desperate. And finally he says, I won't let you do it. I'll fight you. And he stands in front of the portrait hole. And so at this point, Ron loses his temper and he's like, what? Neville, get away from that hole. You don't be an idiot. And he's like, don't you call me an idiot. I don't think you should be breaking any more rules. And you were the one who told me to stand up to people. And Ron's like, yeah, but not us.
What's that?
You don't know what you're doing. So Neville drops his toad and he's like, come on, go on then, try to hit me, I'm ready. And Harry turns to Hermione and he's like, do something. And Hermione is like, Neville, I'm really, really sorry. And puts the Petrificus Totalis curse on him. So he full body binds and falls to the floor. And falls on his face, but they turn him over and he's got this look of horror in his face. And Hermione's like, I'm so sorry, Neville. And Harry's like, we have to, Neville. There's no time to explain. And Ron's like, you'll understand later. And they stepped over him and pulled on the invisibility cloak and headed out the portrait hole. So now they're like, if there are omens, this can't be a good sign.
Right.
Of how things are going to go if this is how it's starting out. But we got to do it. So they get there, almost there. But then on the very last staircase, at the first staircase, they spot Mrs. Norris. And immediately Ron's like, can we kick her just this once? And Harry's like, no, don't kick Filch's cat. And then they didn't see anyone else until they got to the staircase that was literally leading up to the door they needed to go to. And then who do we have? Mr. Peeves bouncing around, and he's just bobbing around, and he's loosening the carpet so that people will trip when they go up the stairs. But, right, as Peeves tends to do. But he realizes that there's someone there, and so he calls out, and he's like, who's there? I know you're there, even if I can't see you. And
are you a ghostie or a ghostie?
or we little beastie. We student beastie. And then he says, should I call Filch? I should, if something's creeping around unseen. And then Harry has an idea all of a sudden, and in a hoarse whisper he says, Peeves, the Bloody Baron has his own reasons for being invisible. And Peeves almost falls out of the air in shock. Peeves listens to no one. Peeves does not ever comply. But Peeves is, for some reason, afraid of the Bloody Baron. So he's like, all right, the Bloody Baron has his own reasons for going unseen. I have business here, so you go away and don't come back here tonight. And Peeves is like, oh, so sorry, your bloodiness, Mr. Baron, sir. My mistake. I don't see you. Of course I didn't. You're invisible. Forgive old Peeves. This was a joke, sir. I will most certainly stay away from here. And then he rose up in the air and he said, hope your business goes well, Baron. I'll not bother you. And he took off. And Ron's like, that was brilliant, Harry. So now they're there. They get to the door. And when they get there, the door was already ajar. So Harry says, well, there you are. Snape's already got past Fluffy. So when they go inside, underneath the cloak, Harry says, if you guys want to go back, I won't blame you. You can take the cloak. I won't need it now. And they're like, don't be stupid. We're coming with you. So they push the door open and they go inside. And the dog... Is he awake or is he asleep? Low rumbling growls. Dog's nose is sniffing madly in their direction, even though it couldn't see them. So they were still under the cloak. The dog couldn't see them. The dog was awake, but could smell them and was sniffing around. And they're like, what's that at his feet? And Ron says, it looks like a harp. Snape must have left it there. And so that's when they realize that you have to play the music, because the moment the music stops, the dog seems to wake up. Right. So he says, all right, well, here goes nothing. And he pulls the flute out of his pocket and he starts playing what's not really a tune, but as soon as he starts playing, the dog's eyes start to droop. And so he slowly starts to fall asleep. He fell to his knees. He slumps to the ground. He's asleep. Ron tells Harry to keep playing as he goes to open the trap door. And they look down inside and realize that they can't see anything. It's just going to be a drop. So Ron's like, Hermione, you want to go first? She's like, nope. And Harry motions to them because he's still playing the flute, but he motions to them and tells them, I'll go first or whatever. Ron's like, you want to go first? You're sure? I don't know how deep it is. So Harry gives Hermione the flute so she can keep playing. And in the few seconds while they switched over, the dog twitched a little. So they had to make sure to keep playing. Mm-hmm. And then he fell back into a deep sleep. So Harry climbs down into the trapdoor and he lowers himself as far as he can. And then he's like, if anything happens to me, don't follow. Go straight to the owlery and send Hedwig to Dumbledore with a letter.
Why didn't they use Lumos?
Because they're 11 years old and they shouldn't have been in the trapdoor in the first place.
But they already knew Lumos, didn't they?
Yeah, but they're also 11 years old. So their full frontal cortex is not fully developed. And if Hermione didn't think of it, then it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And she was playing the flute. She was busy playing the flute, okay?
All right.
So he hangs all the way down as far as he can. He tells Ron, if something happens to me, go send Hedwig to Dumbledore. And he says, I'll see you in a minute, I hope. And he drops down and he's falling down, 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 down. And then he just falls flump. And there's like a soft plant that he lands on. And he yells up to the trap door, which now looks postage stamp size, because that's how far he's fallen down. And he's like, it's okay. It's a soft landing. You can jump. So immediately Ron jumps and he lands next to Harry. And he's like, what is this stuff? And Harry's like, I don't know, some kind of plant. So they land and... so Ron lands and they're like, come on, Hermione. And they hear the music start and a bark, stop, and a bark just as Hermione, makes her jump. And then she lands right next to Harry. And she's like, oh, wow, we must be miles under the school. And Ron's like, yeah, lucky this plant's here. And then Hermione shrieks and she's like, Lucky, look at you guys. And then they look down and notice that the plant has started wrapping itself around them and they hadn't even noticed. And both of their legs are pretty much already wound up. And Hermione pulled herself up real quick and ran toward the wall and is watching in horror as the boys are trying to free themselves from this plant that's trying to wrap itself around their necks. And then Hermione's like, wait, stop moving. I know what this is. It's Devil's Snare. And so they're like, Ron's like, oh, great. So glad you know what it's called. That's great help. She's like, shut up. I'm trying to remember how to kill it. And Harry's like, hurry, because I can't breathe. And so Hermione's reciting to herself, and she's like, Devil's Snare, Devil's Snare. What did Professor Snout say? It likes the dark and damp. So light a fire, Harry choked. And she says, yes, of course, but there's no wood. Ron loses it again, and he's like, have you gone mad? Are you a witch or not? Hermione's, oh, yeah, right. And she pulls out her wand.
I love it.
That's why I said, because they're 11 years old and they just didn't think to use Lumos. So she pulls out her wand and she shoots her blue flames that she's, famous for or whatever, and the plant unravels itself and they're all pulled free. And so then Harry's like, whew, we're so glad you pay attention in neurology, Hermione.
Right.
And then Ron's like, yeah, and lucky Harry doesn't lose his head in a crisis. There's no wood. Honestly. And Harry's like, all right, guys, this way, come on. And so they head down this passageway. And Harry's reminded that there's a dragon underneath Gringotts, which also goes miles underneath the ground. And he's like, oh my gosh, what if there's a dragon? Like, Norbert was bad enough and it wasn't even fully grown. Like, what are we going to do if we come across a dragon? But then they hear something, and it's a soft rustling and clinking sound that seems to be coming from up ahead. And they're like, do you think it's a ghost? And I don't know. It sounds like wings to me. There's light. I can see something moving. So they get there and they get to a brilliantly lit chamber with a ceiling arching really, really high above. And it's full of these small, bright, jewel bright birds fluttering and tumbling all around the room. On the opposite side of the chamber was a heavy wooden door. Do you think they'll attack us as we cross? Said Ron. Probably, said Harry. They go across. They realize the birds don't attack them. They go to the door. They try to open it. Obviously, it's locked. Hermione even tries the Alohomora. It's not working. And then all of a sudden, Ron's like, now what? And Hermione's like, the birds can't just be for decoration. And so they're watching the birds and they realize the birds are glittering. And they're like, glittering? And then Harry suddenly realizes they're not birds. They're keys. They're winged keys. Look, broomsticks. We got to catch the key to the door. Duh. But there's hundreds of them. And Ron looks at the lock on the door and he's like, look, it's a big silver key, probably kind of old-fashioned looking, whatever. And then as they're looking around, Harry realizes that he sees one that has kind of a bent wing. And he's like, there it is, right there. And so he's watching it as he tells Ron and Hermione what to do. So he tells Ron to come from the top, Hermione to come from the bottom. He's going to go straight across. He's going to catch it. Of course, that's no problem for him because who is he? He's the youngest seeker in a century. And this key is bigger than the golden snitch. So he's got his eye on it. They do that to like block it in. It goes toward the wall. Harry crunches it against the wall and has it. They go down. They open the door. And they're through the next door. Incidentally, the key that they were looking for was a big one. It was silver and it had bright blue wings. And the feathers were crumpled on one side.
Psychotic the moment that they touched the broomsticks?
No, that's a book versus movie moment.
No. It says the bewitched keys darted and dived so quickly it was almost impossible to catch.
Yeah, but they never attacked them like they did in the movie. It says they landed quickly. Harry ran to the door. He shoved the key in. It worked. When the lock clicked open, the key just took flight again, and it was looking totally battered because it had been caught twice, but then they just go through the door. So the next chamber is super dark. Huh?
No, it's just it's true. They don't attack the door.
And so they go through the door, and it's super dark, but as they step into the light, they realize that they are standing on a life-size chessboard. And Harry's like, well, now what do we do? And Ron's like, well, isn't it obvious? We have to play across the room. And they could see that they were on the side of the black pieces. The white pieces were on the opposite side. And behind the white pieces, there was a door. And then Hermione's like, well, how do we play? And Ron's like, I think we have to be chessmen. And so he walks up to one of the black pieces and asks, he touches the knight who comes to life. And so he asks it and it nods. And so Ron's like, all right, so let me think for a second. Let me put this all together. And they just wait and let Ron do his thing. He's like, no offense, because neither of you are very good at chess. And they're like, yeah, we're not offended. Tell us what to do. So Ron decides he's going to be a knight. He makes Harry a bishop and Hermione a rook or a castle. And they start playing the game. Well, first Ron's like, usually white plays first. Let's watch. And then a white pawn starts moving. And he's like, yep, here we go. And so they're off and running. And they're playing. A couple of times, Ron like just saves Harry and Hermione before they get gotten by another. Because if you know, with wizard chess, the pieces beat each other up and drag each other off the board. So,
they are completely just broken up.
Yeah, so a couple of times Ron has to save Harry and Hermione real quick before they're gotten by the other team. But then they get to a point where Ron's like, well, it's the only way. He's like, I've got to get taken. And they're like, no, don't do it. Ron's like, it's chess. You have to make some sacrifices. He's like, that leaves you, Harry, to checkmate the king. And Harry's like, bet. And Ron's like, do you want to stop Snape or not? And he's like, Ron? And he's like, look, if you don't hurry up, he'll already have the stone. And they realized there was no alternative. So Ron's like, okay, are you ready? He goes, now don't hang around once you've won. So he steps forward. He moves forward. The White Queen comes up and bonks him on his head. He falls out. He must be knocked out, but they can't run to him because they're still chess pieces. Right. So Harry makes his move, and the king takes off his crown and gives it to Harry. And that then indicates that the game is over and Harry has won. Then the chessmen part and, oh no, he laid it at Harry's feet. He threw it at Harry's feet. He didn't give it to Harry. And so the chessmen parted and bowed, and the doorway was clear, and they look back at Ron, but they have to go on. So Harry and Hermione run through the door and up the next passageway. And Harry's like, he's going to be all right. He's going to be all right. What do you reckon we have next? And Hermione said, well, we've had Sprouts, which was the devil's snare, and Flitwick must have put charms on the keys. McGonagall transfigured the chessmen to make them alive. That leaves Quirrell and Snape. Mm-hmm. They had reached another door, and as they push it open, a disgusting smell fills the air. And they're like, oh my God, this is so gross. And then they look, and what they see is a big old troll, even bigger than the last one, you know, the one they took out in the girls' bathroom. But it's out cold, and it has a bloody lump on its head. And they're like, hey, I'm glad we didn't have to fight that one as they pass through. And they're like, come on, hurry up, because we can't breathe. So as they get to the next door, they're hoping that there's nothing really frightening in there, but when they walk in, it's just a table. And on this table are 7 differently shaped bottles standing in one straight line. And Harry's like, okay, this is Snape's. What do we have to do? And as they step over the threshold, a fire springs up behind them in the doorway. And it's not just any fire, it's a purple fire. And at the same instant, a fire springs up at the doorway in front of them, and it's a black fire. So they're trapped. So Hermione notices that there's a roll of paper, and she opens it up and reads it. And it's kind of long, but you want to read it?
Sure.
Go ahead.
Danger lies before you while safety lies behind. 2 of us will help you, whichever you would find. 1 among us 7 will let you move ahead. Another will transport the drinker back instead. 2 among our number hold only nettle wine. 3 of us are killers, waiting hidden in line. Choose, unless you wish to stay here forevermore. To help you in your choice, we give you these clues 4. First, however slyly the poison tries to hide, you will always find some on nettle wine's left side. Second, different are those who stand at either end, but if you would move onward, neither is your friend. Third, as you see clearly, all are different sizes. Neither dwarf nor giant holds death in their insides. Fourth, the second left and the second on the right are twins once you taste them, though different at first sight.
And Hermione's like, brilliant! It's not even magic, it's just logic. She's like, a lot of magicians would be stuck in here. And Harry's like, yeah, aren't we stuck in here? And Hermione's like, of course not. Everything we need is on this paper. 7 bottles, 3 are potions, 2 are wine, 1 will get us through the black fire, and 1 will get us through the purple fire. Harry's like, but how do we know which one? And Hermione's like, just give me a minute. And so she's going through and she's pointing at bottles and she's doing all these things. And of course, she figures it all out. And she's like, all right, the smallest bottle will get us through the black fire toward the stone. And Harry picks it up and he looks at it and he's like, but there's only enough for one of us. There's hardly one swallow. So they look at each other. And Harry's like, well, which one gets you through the purple flames? And Hermione points at the rounded bottle at the other end of the line. And he says, okay, drink that. Go back, get Ron, grab brooms from the flying key room. They'll get you out of the trapdoor and past Fluffy, go straight to the Owlery and send Hedwig to Dumbledore. We need him. I might be able to hold Snape off for a while, but I'm no match for him, really. And Hermione's like, but I know, right? But Hermione's like, but Harry, what if you know who's with him? And Harry's like, well, I was lucky once, wasn't I? Maybe I'll get lucky again. But either way, he's determined. Like, there's no other option. He feels like he has to do this.
Yeah.
So she dashes at Harry and she throws her arms around him. And he's like, Hermione. And she's like, Harry, you're a great wizard. And he's like, I'm not as good as you. And he's kind of embarrassed. And she's like, me? Books and cleverness. There are more important things. Friendship and bravery. And, oh, Harry, be careful. So Harry's like, you drink first. You're sure which is which, right? And Hermione's like, yeah, I'm positive, and takes a long drink out of the bottle. And he's like, it's not poison, right? And she's like, no, but it's like ice. And so she goes and walks straight through the purple fire. And Harry's like, all right. So he takes a deep breath and he picks up the bottle and he turns to face the black flames. And he says, here I come. Drains the little bottle, and it felt like ice flowing through his bottle. So he walks forward, he braces himself, and the black flames, he can't feel them, but he can see them licking his body, but he can't see anything. And then he comes out in the other side into the last chamber, and there's somebody already there, but it isn't Snape, and it isn't even Voldemort. And that's where the chapter ends. Bum, bum, bum.
The chapter ends in massive suspense.
Literally the last line. There was already someone there, but it wasn't Snape. It wasn't even Dumbledore. I mean, Voldemort. Bum, bum, bum. All right.
Okay.
So,